Um, Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I'm the chairman of the Ulster History Circle, and on behalf of the Circle, I'd like to welcome you all to today's unveiling of what is our 285th blue plaque. As a result, I think, of a little careful planning, we're gathered here exactly 193 years to the day that the person we're commemorating was born in 1832. Charlotte Riddell, known as the Queen of Ghost Stories, was born at the Barn in Carrickfergus and found fame as a novelist in Victorian London. The Ulster History Circle is delighted to commemorate this once popular and prolific writer with a blue plaque at the appropriate setting of Carrickfergus Library. The Circle is grateful to the Ulster Scots Agency for their financial support towards the plaque and to Libraries NI for their kind assistance. The Ulster History Circle puts up our plaques across the 9 counties of Ulster to celebrate the achievements of those men and women who've contributed significantly to our history, locally, nationally, and internationally. We're an entirely voluntary body with no funds of our own and rely on the support of local authorities, individuals, organisations, and businesses to fund our plaques. There's no such similar body doing what we do throughout this whole island of Ireland. Our circle plaques usually take many months and even years in the planning, and a considerable amount of voluntary work is needed to bring them together for the unveiling day. I must especially thank my colleagues David Hume and Maud Hamill for all the work that they've put in towards organising today's event. The Ulster History Circle, as I'm sure you've seen, already has a blue plaque on this library to Robert O'Drain from Carrickfergus, a distinguished mathematician in America in the early 1800s. And today we're commemorating another person from here who made their mark towards the end of the 19th century. The Circle's plaque, the Circle plaques have been welcomed on many library buildings across Northern Ireland. And today I must particularly thank Jennifer Stafford, Area Manager for Libraries of Northern Ireland, and the manager and their team here at Carrick Library for the support they've given to today's event. I must also thank Infinite Signs and Design of Newry, who supplied and fitted the plaque today. Today's plaque to Charlotte Riddell has been championed by someone who is a dedicated member of the Ulster History Circle and a well-known historian here in East Antrim, and also further afield, thanks to the Long and the Short of It TV series. So I'd like to invite Dr. David Hume to tell us more about the person we're commemorating today. David, thank you.
Good day, everyone. I'll just be short. But yes, this is an amazing lady that we're commemorating and about to commemorate today, Charlotte Riddell. I have 2 little extracts from her work, which I thought would read. It would be appropriate to hear her voice as well today. So one is from her ghost story called The Uninhabited House in 1875. And it's about a house that's uninhabitable because so many scary things happen that tenants can't stay in it. It's not to their liking. The hero of the story is a man called Patterson, and he gets to the root of the whole situation, and he witnesses the full story as to what happened and the revenge of the man who was murdered in the house called Elmsdale against the man who shot him called Harringford. And Harringford staged the death to make it look like suicide. So that's the gist of the plot of the story. So this is just a little short extract from that. I don't want River Hall. I would not give that, and he snapped his fingers, to have the title deeds in my hands tomorrow. But as Miss Elmsdale wishes to sell, and as no one else will buy, I offer what I consider a fair price for the place. If you think you can do better, well and good. If... He stopped suddenly in his sentence. Then rising, he cried, "It's a trick, a vile, infamous, disgraceful trick," while his utterance grew thick and his face began to work like that of a person in convulsions. "What do you mean?" I asked, rising also, and turning to look in the direction he indicated with outstretched arm and dilated eyes. Then I saw no need for him to answer. Standing in the entrance to the room was Robert Elmsdale himself. Darkness for a background, the light of the gas falling fully upon his face. Slowly, sternly, he came forward step by step. With footfalls that fell noiselessly, he advanced across the carpet, moving steadily forward towards Mr. Harringford, who, beating the air with his hands, screamed, "Keep him off! Don't let him touch me!" and fell full length on the floor. The rest you'll have to read yourselves. Harringford, he he recovers slightly, but it's the end of Harringford. He passes away as a result of this incident. So the ghost has got its revenge on the much earlier incident. And then another little extract. This is from, I think I was first introduced to Charlotte Riddell through this excellent little paperback, which Dr. Philip Robinson from Bonnie Before, originally from Carrickfergus, was very much involved in the reprinting of it and writing the foreword for it. And in Tales of Bonnie Before and Scotch Quarter, we see an earlier Charlotte writing a much younger period in her life. And it's not ghost stories that she's written. She writes about people in the area, and one of the ladies, a lady called Meg Donnan, or Margaret Donnan, who is the centerpiece of one of these stories. And she writes of Kingsloch, which is the town she lives in, which we know as Carrickfergus, but she describes as Kingsloch in her work. She does give some place names, like Dalway's Bawn is mentioned, so that's still with us, of course, a name we recognise. But just the very end of this, it's a very long story, and it's a very good story about Meg and her relationship to her two grandchildren, and the people around. So there's lots of different things happen in this story. The children are brought back from England. It's presumed the fact that their mother has died, so that the family presume that it wasn't a properly arranged marriage, and they want to get the grandchildren away. And they're quite wealthy, so they bring grandchildren back to her, and they then stay with her for a time. But it all comes round in the end that they realise everything was fine, and they then take charge of the children and look after Margaret as well too. So this is the last sort of concluding paragraphs of that story. Space will not permit me to tell of all the prosperous sunshine which flooded the evening of that honest life. General Prior took the children, but year by year he brought them back to visit their grandmother in the cottage he bought for her. Her cottage, covered with roses and jasmine and set upon a small knoll, which commanded a view of the loch and the county down, the hills softly blending with the sky, and the castle stretching out into the sea, and all the fair country around about. She loved to see Maggie's husband and Norman's wife, and to hear Willie Craig, that terribly bad boy, as the neighbours called him, whom she had taken to her own home when all his own friends died in the time of virulent fever, say, "I am captain of a schooner now, Mrs. Donnan, and what I am and all I possess in the world, I owe to you." So that's the end of that little story. That's how it concludes. Now, those two extracts sort of give two very different impressions, if you like, and they're really markers for Charlotte's life in some ways. She was born Charlotte Elizabeth Lawson Cowan on this day in 1832 at the Barn, an area that's more, people would be more familiar with the Barn today for what used to be Carrick Hospital, and then later the health centre, and of course the football ground in that area. And she was the youngest daughter of James Cowan, who was a mill owner and the former High Sheriff of County Antrim. One account referred to her as having a comfortable and cushioned childhood, which we can imagine would have been the case. But things changed. Her father died, and he left mostly everything to the family of his first marriage. So Charlotte and her mother and other members of the family were forced to leave the Barn. They ended up in the Crigant Hills in a cottage there, and life became rather more unpredictable and harsh for Charlotte from that point on. There was one constant in her life, and that was writing. She had been a writer from a young age. She said in 1853, "I never remember a time when I did not compose." And before she was old enough to hold a pen, she was getting her mother, Ellen Kilshaw, to write down her ideas, and her first novel written as a 15-year-old. So a very, very early writer. She also did say in her memoir that she had read the Quran at the age of 8, but I'm not quite sure whether that was just good marketing and branding but on her part. But she certainly clearly was a very young writer and was really interested in writing and ideas and imagination and all those things. And her early writing, the Tales from Bonnie Before and Scotch Quarter, based down in this town of Kingsloch, which we readily identify as Carrickfergus. And Bonnie Before, of course, is just up the road from us, and would have been a small settlement at that time, all thatched cottages, very, very different than today. But in 1855, Charlotte left Craig and she went to London. Um, she had featured Craig in which is largely an autobiographical novel called Burna Boyle, a love story of the County Down. But this writing, she felt was her outlet in terms of business proposition. She could write and she could make money if her books were sold. So she went to London um, to try and rise above the situation and earn money from her writings. And uh, it's never easy for any writer or author. But you can imagine in 1855 it was tough in London, going around publishers with manuscript and trying to get somebody to buy into this. And there were many rejections. So she really had to be fairly thick-skinned, I think, to continue on, and very truculent about it all. Her mother died the following year, and in 1857, she then married Joseph Hadley Riddell, who was a civil engineer from Staffordshire, living in London. Um, and she continued to write, and she wrote under a number of pseudonyms in the early years. But her big break came in 1864 with a novel called George Geith of Fen Court. And in that book, she managed to describe the Fens in considerable detail. The fact that she had never actually physically been there showed how brilliant a writer she was, to be able to convey it as if it was just in front of you. And between 1864 and 1902, she wrote upwards of 30 novels. She was the editor of St James's Magazine, a London literary journal. And her husband had also given her insights into the workings of the City of London and the financial district. So she started to write about that. She was one of the early novelists who started to write about that subject as well. Unfortunately, Joseph's insights into the workings of the City of London didn't extend to him handling money very well. And when he died, he left her in considerable debt. And the only way Charlotte felt she could get out of that debt was to write more and publish more, which she duly did. So I think she combined a business head with a talent for a writer. And she's regarded as one of the foremost of the Victorian ghost story writers. And the Victorians, of course, were fascinated by ghosts and the supernatural. She is, as has been said earlier, she's regarded as the queen of ghost stories, as one tribute put it. And her articles were known far and wide. I came across a copy of a short story in the Southern Cross newspaper from Invercargill in New Zealand, which references Carrickfergus, the coach road through Ballycarry to Larne, and all the landscape in between, intertwined with a very engaging plot as well. And I was quite amazed to see that article from New Zealand. She died in 1906. Her passing was reported from Larne to Littleton, New Zealand, and lots of other places, of course, in between, and was an indication of her profile as a novelist. So the plaque today will honour Charlotte Riddell in her native town, the town of Charlotte Cowan. It's a town associated with literary figures such as Jonathan Swift, who was inspired for Gulliver's Travels when he was here, Louis MacNeice, Adrian McKinty in more modern times, and others. So now there's a rightful tribute to Charlotte, the queen of ghost stories, and she will be remembered. And hopefully her ghost would approve. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you very much, David, indeed. Our blue plaques always need funding. And for many years, the Ulster Scots Agency has been a valued funding partner for plaques both here in Northern Ireland and in the border counties of Donegal, Cavan and Monaghan. With us today is David Gilliland, Director of Development for the Ulster Scots Agency, and I'd like to ask David to say a few words now, please.
Thanks, Chris. Good morning, folks. I'm delighted to be here today on behalf of the Ulster Scots Agency as a plaque is unveiled by the Ulster History Circle to another local notable with an Ulster Scots heritage. The agency are very keen to support the work of the Circle as they highlight contributions to society across a spectrum of activity, and we are particularly keen to do so when the person being marked has Ulster Scots roots. The plaque today to Charlotte Riddell joins other plaques to women like Anne Atchison, Amy Carmichael and Monica de Vitchfield. But it also joins other plaques to literary figures with Ulster Scots roots like W.G. Little, David Herbison, Thomas Main Reid and Cyril Leach. And it's that literary connection that I think it's important to highlight. One of the defining characteristics of the Ulster Scots has been a love of literacy. Driven in the early days by a religious mission, there was a move to ensure that people were able to read the good book. Now we're keen to ensure that people read good books. But this focus on literacy has also provided an outlet for others who want to use that knowledge to provide outlets for others to expand their horizons, see their lived experiences shared by others, broaden their knowledge, or even just to transport themselves to another place or time. From the Weaver poets from across many communities here in County Antrim and Down to world famous novelists, that spark of creativity has been present. We know of the works of people like James Orr from Ballycarry, David Harbison of Dunclug, but also people like Edgar Allan Poe, James McHenry, Thomas Mayne Reid, and John Steinbeck, amongst others, who have roots back to this place. Charlotte Riddell, as David has outlined, has a place amongst a rich literary tradition that exists within the community. Her fame from writing tales of ghostly goings-on, amongst other things, sits nicely alongside the work of another writer with roots back here to Ulster and the County Cavan, Edgar Allan Poe, and his fascination with the macabre. Perhaps the blackness of his raven provided some inspiration for Riddell's description of the Presbyterians of the Black North in her book Burnaboy. However, that storytelling capacity is one that seems well ingrained in folk with roots in this part of the world. Thomas Mayne Reid, the poet, writer, and journalist, was a brave and good storyteller, so good that even Poe described him as an accomplished liar, but with the finish of an artist, which is probably as close to a compliment as an Ulster Scot will ever give you. Growing up in Carrickfergus in the mid-19th century, Charlotte perhaps was acquainted with the literary endeavours of another Ulsterman, James McHenry, who was from not far away in Larne, but who had travelled to the US and honed his writing skills there before returning to his homeland. It's hard to imagine that some element of his renown wouldn't have filtered across the short miles between the two places. Aware or not, Charlotte's work places her within a sphere of literary talent that oftentimes had to find its feet away from this place. It's therefore very pleasing to be able to gather today, particularly as it's her anniversary of her birthday, to celebrate her achievements here, much closer to her home, and to hopefully encourage others to find out much more about her. Thank you very much.
It's just a tiny few words, it's all right. I have to say, first of all, how deeply honoured I feel to be asked to unveil a blue plaque. I've been at many of these ceremonies, and for me to be asked to pull the cord is quite, it's a real honour. So thank you very much for that. And I have to say, it's been a bit of a revelation to hear about this Carrickfergus-born woman, Charlotte Riddell, an author whose considerable contribution to the literary world is perhaps little recognised in this part of the world, but the work of the Society and the Blue Plaque and everything that's happening here today will hopefully change all that. And I was particularly impressed that in times of financial difficulty, it was writing she turned to support her mother and then her husband, and that her solution to challenging times came to gain her a very considerable reputation in the Victorian literary world. And a time when we know, let's face it, the cultural expectation of women, both middle and upper class, was to create a domestic haven with little or no interest or activity in the larger world outside the home. I remember the phrase, the angel in the house, because I was doing an open university course and this came up and I thought, thank goodness I don't live back then, because how many women were thwarted by that cultural and that society as it was. And thank goodness Charlotte was not one of them. And I do remember at the time doing my open university, I was a wife and a mother and working in radio. And yes, my mother-in-law often referred to it as gadding about, gathering stories for the radio. So a touch of the Victoriana there. Yeah. But anyway, she meant well. And I can't help but wonder too, if it had not been for the adversity in her life, would Charlotte Riddell Cowan perhaps ever have had the opportunity to flourish, to show her obvious literary talents to the world? So every dark cloud, that maxim, has a silver lining. And thank goodness Charlotte Riddell found that. So well done to everyone who has organised this event. And it will bring Charlotte to the knowledge of locals and visitors alike. And it's a wonderful thing to be asked to be involved in. So thank you very much, all the Ulster History Circle folk. Thank you.
Right, okay. 1, 2, 3. Put it. Yeah.